In the year 1885, in the dust-choked town of Eldridge, Montana, where the plains stretched out like a worn blanket under a sky heavy with unspoken promises, Eliza trudged along the rutted main street with her 3 children in tow. The wind whipped fine grit into her eyes, stinging like accusations she could not escape. Her eldest Samuel, 7 years old, and already carrying the weight of a man, clutched his little sister's hand Mary, 5, her cheeks hollow from days of scant meal. The baby Thomas, barely 2, whimpered against her chest, wrapped in a threadbare shawl that smelled of sweat and faded hope. Eliza's boots, cracked and caked with mud from the trail, sank into the soft earth churned by recent rains, each step a reminder of how far she had fallen. The town sprawled indifferent before her, its wooden facades bleached by the relentless sun saloons spilling laughter that mocked her silence. She had come here seeking shelter, any scrap of kindness, after the fever took her husband back in Kansas, leaving her with debts and dreams turned to ash. But the banker had turned her away with a curt shake of his head, his ledger book slamming shut like a door on her pleas. The preacher at the clapboard church offered prayers, but no bread, his eyes averting as if her desperation were contagious. Even the widow who ran the boarding house, her face etched with her own hardships, had muttered about no room for strays and shut the screen door with a finality that echoed in Eliza's bones. Her arms ached from holding Thomas, her back bent under the bundle of their few belongings. A cast-iron skillet, a quilt pieced from old dresses, and a tin of hardtack that rattled emptily now. The children's faces were smeared with dirt, their eyes wide with a hunger that went beyond the belly. Samuel tugged at her skirt, his voice small against the wind. "Mama, where we going now?" She knelt, though her knees protested, and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead, her fingers rough from washing and scrubbing in rivers along the way. "We'll find a place, darling, just a bit farther." But inside a hollow ache spread cold as the shadows lengthening across the prairie. The world spun on without her wagons rumbling past folks, averting their gazes, as if she were a ghost haunting their prosperity. As the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in bruised purples and golds, Eliza led them beyond the town's edge, where the land opened up to scrub brush and distant buttes rising like silent sentinels. Her mind wandered back to the days before, fragments of memory, sharp as thorns. She saw her husband Jacob strong and laughing in the fields of their homestead, his hands calloused from plowing the stubborn earth. They had dreamed of a life out west, away from the crowded east, but the drought came first, then the fever that burned through him like wildfire. She had nursed him through nights of delirium, her own body weakening as she rationed food for the children. In the end, she buried him under a lone cottonwood, the dirt clinging to her palms as she whispered promises she could no longer keep. The betrayal stung deepest from her own kin. Her brother, insane. Lewis had written once promising help, but when she arrived with the children, his wife had barred the door, whispering of shame and burdens too great. "We can't take in more mouths," she'd said, her voice laced with pity that cut like a knife. Eliza had turned away, then boarding a stagecoach with the last of their savings, heading further into the unknown. Now here in Eldridge, the rejection repeated, a cycle of doors closing, faces turning. The wind howled through the grasses, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, but it offered no solace. Her throat tightened with unshed tears, not for herself, but for the little ones who deserved more than this wandering exile. Night was falling fast, the air turning crisp with the promise of frost. Eliza spotted a faint light in the distance, a solitary ranch house at the edge of the plains, smoke curling from its chimney like a hesitant invitation. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but she pressed on Samuel and Mary, stumbling beside her. The house was modest weathered boards and a sagging porch flanked by a barn where a horse nickered softly. As they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man tall and lean, his hat pulled low, silhouetted against the fading light. He paused, rifle in hand, not threatening, but watchful, like the land itself, assessing intruders. Eliza halted, heart pounding. "Please," she called, her voice cracking like dry earth. "We've nowhere else." just for the night. The children huddled close, Thomas fussing against her. The man said nothing at first, his eyes scanning them in the dimness. Then, with a slow nod, he set the rifle aside and stepped forward, his boots crunching on gravel. Barn's empty, he muttered, voice rough as gravel roads. Hay's dry. It was not much, but in that moment it felt like redemption whispered on the wind. Join the journey through history with Wild West Chronicles. The man's name was Caleb Harrow. He spoke little that first night, only enough to point them toward the barn's wide doors and toss down an extra blanket from the loft rough wool that still carried the faint livery scent of horses long gone. Eliza settled the children on a thick bed of hay. Thomas nestled between her and Mary, while Samuel curled against her back like a small shield. She listened to the wind moan against the boards, to the soft rustle of mice in the rafters, to the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. For the first time in weeks, no one had slammed a door in her face. It was not kindness yet, only mercy, but mercy felt like air after drowning. Dawn came cold and pale. Frost silvered the grass outside the barn door. Eliza rose before the children stirred, smoothed her hair with trembling fingers, and stepped into the yard. Smoke already rose from the ranch house chimney. She hesitated at the porch steps, then knocked once softly. Caleb appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled to the elbows, forearms corded from years of work. He regarded her without surprise. "Coffee's hot," he said. "Biscuits, too, if the boy can carry 'em." She followed him inside. The kitchen was spare plank table iron stove shelves, lined with jars of beans and dried apples. No curtains, no pictures, only the clean smell of wood smoke and lye soap. He poured coffee into a tin cup and slid a plate of biscuits across the table. They were plain, a little tough, but warm. She broke one open, steam rising like a sigh, and carried pieces back to the barn for the children. Samuel ate, slowly watching the house as though waiting for the moment it would vanish. Days blurred into routine. Caleb did not ask questions, and Eliza did not offer answers. She swept the porch, scrubbed the milk pails, mended a tier in the henhouse netting with twine she found in the barn. The work was hard, familiar grounding. Her hands bled again in new places, but the pain felt honest. At evening, she cooked supper in his kitchen, potatoes fried with salt pork gravy thickened with flour she sifted through her fingers. He ate in silence at first, then began to speak in short sentences. "Lost my brother 2 winters back. Pneumonia. Wife left before that." Said the quiet here was louder than she could stand. "Kept the place anyway. Ground don't leave." She listened without pity or interruption. When he finished, she simply nodded and passed him the last biscuit. Something unspoken settled between them, fragile as new ice. One afternoon, while she hung laundry on a line strung between 2 cottonwoods, Caleb came from the barn leading a sway-backed mare. He handed the reins to Samuel. "Gentle," he said. "Name's Nell. She won't spook easy." Samuel's eyes widened. He stroked the mare's neck with careful reverence. Mary watched from the porch, clutching a rag doll whose stitching had begun to unravel. Eliza felt a sudden heat behind her eyes, not tears exactly, but something close. She turned away to pin a sheet, hiding the tremor in her hands. Weeks passed. The children grew less wary. Thomas learned to toddle after Caleb's shadow, tugging at his pant leg until the man lifted him onto broad shoulders and carried him to see the new calves. Mary began to sing again, small, tuneless songs she made up while gathering eggs. Samuel followed Caleb like a second shadow, learning to cinch a saddle, to read a horse's ears, to mend fence wire without cursing. Eliza watched it all from the edges, heart tight with gratitude and fear in equal measure. She had not expected safety to feel so dangerous. One evening, after the children were asleep in the small room Caleb had cleared for them at the back of the house, Eliza found him on the porch, staring at the stars. The air smelled of sage and coming frost. She wrapped her shawl tighter and sat on the top step beside him. You don't have to keep us, she said quietly. We've been enough trouble. He did not look at her right away. When he spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. Trouble's what the land gives everybody. Some of it walks on two legs. Some of it grows horns. Ain't never known the difference to matter much. She let the silence stretch. Then, softer, I don't know how to pay you back. Don't need paying back. He turned his head, then eyes catching moonlight. Just need somebody who stays. The words landed like stones in still water. She felt the ripple move through her chest, stirring things she had buried deep. She looked out at the dark prairie, at the faint silver thread of the creek winding through it, and understood that staying would mean more than sweeping floors or frying potatoes. It would mean trusting again, risking again, choosing again. She did not answer that night. But when she rose to go inside, she let her shoulder brush his, the lightest touch deliberate. He did not move away. The first real crack came with winter. Snow arrived early that year, not in gentle drifts, but in a hard driving wind that scoured the plains and piled against the house like white accusations. The creek froze solid, the cattle huddled in the lee of the boot breath steaming in white plumes. Eliza woke before dawn to the sound of Caleb splitting wood behind the barn, the axe strokes regular as a heartbeat. She dressed quickly in the cold room, breath clouding the air, and went to help. They worked side by side without speaking much. She carried armloads of split pine to the porch while he stacked it under the eaves. Their gloves touched once when she reached for the same piece. Neither pulled away immediately. The silence between them had grown comfortable, almost necessary, like the space between fence posts. Yet she felt the weight of what had not been said pressing heavier each day. That evening, after the children were fed and asleep, a rider appeared at the edge of the yard. Lantern light caught the brass buttons on his coat. Sheriff Harlan Tate, broad-shouldered and slow-moving, the kind of lawman who preferred paperwork to gunplay but carried both. Caleb stepped onto the porch, first Eliza close behind, with a shawl pulled tight. Caleb, Tate said, tipping his hat. His eyes slid past to Eliza, lingering. Folks in town been talking. Say you got a woman and 3 young ones holed up here. Caleb's voice stayed level. They're here. What if it? Tate shifted in the saddle. Word come down from Kansas. Letter from a man named of Jacob Whitaker's brother claims the widow's got no legal right to keep the children if she ain't providing proper. Says the family wants 'em back. Sent papers. Judge'll hear it come spring if it comes to that. Eliza felt the porch boards tilt beneath her feet. Jacob had no living brother. The man must be some cousin or opportunist sniffing after the homestead title she still held in her name. She stepped forward, voice thin but steady. They're mine. I buried their father. I carried them across 3 states. No paper changes that. Tate rubbed his jaw. Law's the law, Mom. I ain't here to drag nobody tonight. Just letting you know it's coming town's already taken side. Some say it ain't decent a single woman staying out here with a bachelor. Others say it's nobody's business. He looked at Caleb. You aim to fight it. Caleb did not answer right away. He stared past the sheriff into the dark where snow swirled like ghosts. Finally he said, I aim to keep what's mine to keep. Tate nodded once, turned his horse, and rode back into the night. Inside, Eliza stood at the kitchen window watching the lantern bob away until it vanished. Caleb came in behind her, hung his coat, poured coffee he did not drink. I can leave, she said without turning. Take them east before spring. I won't drag you into court. He set the cup down hard enough that coffee sloshed onto the table. You think I kept you here out of charity? She turned then. His face was shadowed, but his eyes burned with something raw. I kept you because the house was empty before you came. Because Samuel asks questions now instead of just watching. Because Mary sings when she gathers eggs, and Thomas laughs when I set him on Nell's back. Because you look at this place like it could still mean something. He took one step closer, and because every night I lie awake wondering what it would feel like to wake up and find you still here." The words hung between them plain and heavy. Eliza felt tears rise hot and sudden. She crossed the small distance and pressed her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her slowly, careful, as though she might break. She smelled wood smoke and leather and the faint iron tang of the cold outside. For a long minute, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "I'm scared." "So am I," he said against her hair. "But I ain't scared of the fight." The next weeks were quiet but taut. They worked harder than ever, repairing the windmill that groaned under ice-hauling water from the one open spring, slaughtering an old steer so the smokehouse would be full come deep winter. The children sensed the change. Samuel grew quieter, Mary clung more often. Eliza taught them their letters by lamplight, using a charred stick on the back of an old feed sack, determined they would not lose what little schooling they had known. One night after the house was dark, Caleb found her sitting on the edge of the bed. She shared with the children, staring at the small wooden box she kept under it. Inside lay Jacob's wedding band, a thin gold circle worn smooth, and the deed to the Kansas claim she had never been able to sell. He knelt in front of her. "You still thinking of running?" She shook her head. "I'm thinking of staying, but I don't know if I can ask you to stand with me against the town." "Against the law." He took her hands, rough palms against rough palms. "I've been alone a long time, Eliza. Long enough to know what alone feels like. I'd rather stand with you and lose than stand without you and win." She searched his face in the faint glow from the stove. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, not tentative, but sure, the way a person kisses when they have run out of safer choices. His mouth tasted of coffee and salt. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his again. "Then we stand," she said. Outside the wind howled on, indifferent as ever. But inside the house something small and stubborn had taken root. Spring thawed the land slowly, grudgingly, as though the earth itself distrusted new beginnings. Creeks swelled with meltwater brown and fast. The prairie grass pushed up green spears through last year's brown mat. Caleb and Eliza worked the rhythm of repair-mending corrals, splintered by winter wind-burning brush piles that had collected snow-like accusations, planting early potatoes in soil, still cool to the touch. The children ran barefoot again, mud to their knees, laughter sharp against the quiet that had settled over the house like frost. But the letter arrived with the first warm wind. It came wrapped in brown paper, carried by a boy from town who rode up, dropped the envelope on the porch rail without dismounting, and spurred away before Caleb could speak. Eliza opened it at the kitchen table while the coffee cooled. The words were formal, inked in a careful hand, a summons to appear before the circuit judge in Eldridge come the first week of May. Claimant one Elias Whitaker, distant cousin to her late husband, asserting guardianship over Samuel, Mary, and Thomas on grounds of moral unfit environment and lack of stable provision. The paper trembled in her fingers. She set it down as though it might burn. Caleb read it, standing behind her chair. When he finished, he folded the page once precisely and placed it beside the sugar bowl. "We go," he said. She looked up. "You don't have to." "I know." The days before the hearing passed in a strange hush. Eliza scrubbed the house until the pine boards gleamed. She mended every tear in the children's clothes, starched Samuel's shirt collar until it stood like cardboard. She told them only that they were going to town for important business, nothing more. At night, she lay awake beside Caleb, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the heat of him like an anchor. He never asked her to leave again. She never offered. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and merciless. They loaded the wagon before first light, Eliza in her best dress, faded calico but clean. The children scrubbed pink, Caleb in a dark wool coat he had not worn since his brother's funeral. The ride into Eldridge was silent, save for the creak of wheels and the occasional low of cattle drifting from distant ranges. Samuel sat between them on the seat, small hands clenched in his lap. Mary clutched her rag doll. Thomas slept against Eliza's shoulder, thumb in his mouth. The courthouse was a low brick building on the main street, its steps worn smooth by years of boots and promises broken. Inside, the air smelled of old paper tobacco and nervous sweat. The judge, a narrow man named Harlan Crow with wire spectacles and a voice like dry corn husks, called the case without ceremony. Elias Whitaker stood at the petitioner's table, thin, red-haired, wearing a store-bought suit that hung loose on his frame. He did not look at Eliza once. His lawyer spoke first. The widow's prolonged cohabitation with an unmarried man constituted moral peril. The children deserved a proper Christian home with bloodkin. The Kansas property deed remained in Eliza's name, but could be contested if guardianship changed hands. He produced affidavits from 2 women in Eldridge who claimed to have seen Eliza enter Caleb's house after dark on multiple occasions. The words landed like stones in still water. Caleb's hand found Eliza's beneath the table. His grip was steady, calloused thumb, brushing her knuckles once, twice. When the judge turned to them, Caleb rose without prompting. "Your Honor," he said, voice carrying clear across the small room, "I ain't much for speeches, but I'll say this plain. These children ain't been hungry since they stepped on my land. Samuel can throw a loop now. Mary gathers eggs without breaking a one. Thomas knows the names of half the calves in the pasture. Their mother works harder than any hand I ever hired, and she don't complain. If that's moral peril, then half this territory's in danger." A murmur rippled through the bench's townfolk who had come to watch, some nodding, some frowning. The judge raised a hand for quiet. Caleb went on. "I filed intention to marry Eliza Whitaker 2 weeks ago at the county clerk's office. Certificates right here." He drew a folded paper from his coat and laid it on the table. "If the court sees fit to let her keep her own, we'll make it legal come summer. If not," he paused, looked straight at the judge, "I reckon we'll figure another way." Eliza felt the air leave her lungs. She had not known about the filing. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall here. Judge Crow studied the certificate, then the room. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitaker," he said to the cousin, "you got blood claim, but blood don't fill bellies or mend fences. I see no evidence of neglect, only gossip. Case dismissed. Children remain with their mother." Elias Whitaker's face flushed dark. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out without another word. The door banged shut behind him. Outside on the courthouse steps, the sun was high and warm. Samuel tugged at Caleb's sleeve. "You gonna marry Mama?" Caleb looked down at the boy, then at Eliza. "If she'll have me." Eliza stepped close, rose on her toes, and kissed him right there in the open light, slow, deliberate, unashamed. The children laughed. Someone on the sidewalk whistled low. When she pulled back, her cheeks were wet. "I already said yes," she whispered. "Just took the long way around." They drove home under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. That evening, Eliza hung Caleb's coat on the peg by the door, the marriage certificate tucked safe in its pocket. Later, after the children slept, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching stars prick through the dark. He slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, not new but worn smooth by years in a drawer. She slid Jacob's ring from her own finger and placed it in his palm. "Keep it for Samuel one day," she said. He closed his hand around it. "I will." The wind moved soft through the new grass. Somewhere, a calf bawled, answered by its mother. Eliza leaned into Caleb's shoulder, felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and knew for the first time in years that tomorrow would come, and they would meet it together. The years after, the courthouse steps slipped by like water through open fingers, steady, unhurried, carrying small changes that accumulated into something solid. By 1887, the house had grown a new wing, 2 rooms added with lumber Caleb hauled from the railhead, at Billings nails pounded in by lantern light while the children slept. Samuel, 9 now and tall for his age, helped frame the walls, his hammer strikes ringing sharp and sure. Mary learned to churn butter until the cream turned golden, then to knead dough with small, determined fists. Thomas, sturdy and sun-brown, trailed after the older ones, like a shadow collecting feathers from the yard to stuff into a pillow Eliza sewed for his bed. Eliza's hands bore new-marked scars from barbed wire burns from the cookstove, calluses thick as leather, but they moved with a quiet certainty she had not known before. She planted a kitchen garden behind the house, rows of carrots, beans, climbing poles, dill that perfumed the air when the wind turned south. In summer, the children helped pick choke cherries. In fall, they pressed cider under the cottonwood whose leaves turned the color of old gold. The prairie no longer felt like exile. It felt like home carved out of stubborn ground. Caleb changed too, though slower, deeper. The lines around his eyes softened when he watched Eliza cross the yard with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. He spoke more, not in long speeches, but in the small observations that built days into years. Winds shift in rain by morning, or that bay colts got his damn speed. At night, after the lamp was blown out, he would reach for her hand under the quilt and hold it until sleep took them both. Sometimes he woke before dawn and lay listening to the house, breathed the soft snores of the children, the creak of settling timbers, Eliza's even breathing beside him, and felt a gratitude so large it hurt. Trouble still came, as trouble does on open land. A late blizzard in 1889 took 3 cows and a calf. The following summer, grasshoppers stripped half the hay crop. There were nights when Eliza sat at the kitchen table with the ledger book pencil worn to a nub, trying to make numbers lie less cruelly. Caleb would find her there, chin in hand, and sit across from her without a word. He never promised it would be easy. He only stayed. One crisp October morning, when frost rimmed the fence posts and the sky was the pale blue of washed denim, Eliza woke to find Caleb already gone from the bed. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. He stood in the yard holding Nell's reins. The old mare was saddled, a blanket roll tied behind the cantle. Samuel stood beside him, arms folded, face serious. Caleb turned when he heard the door. Thought I'd ride out to check the North Range. Be back by supper. Eliza descended the steps slowly. You're taking the long way. He gave a small, crooked smile. Maybe. She reached him, placed her palm flat against his chest over the wool vest. His heart beat steady beneath her fingers. You coming back, always do. She studied his face, the faint scar above his left brow, from a barbed wire tear years before, the gray, threading his temples now. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him, slow and deliberate, the way she had on the courthouse steps. When she stepped back, she slipped a small cloth bundle into his saddlebag, 2 biscuits, a wedge of cheese, the last of the dried apples. Eat, she said. Don't make me come looking. He touched the brim of his hat. Yes, ma'am. Samuel stepped forward, then holding out a small, carved wooden horse he had whittled over weeks of evenings. For luck, he said. Caleb took it, turned it in his palm, thumb tracing the curve of the neck. Fine work, son. He tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Mary and Thomas appeared on the porch, sleepy-eyed and barefoot. Caleb lifted each in turn, pressed a kiss to their hair, set them down gently. Then he swung into the saddle, tipped his hat once more to Eliza, and nudged Nell toward the open gate. They watched him ride until horse and rider were only a dark speck against the gold prairie, then smaller still until the land swallowed him whole. Eliza stood there long after, arms wrapped around herself, feeling the familiar hollow open in her chest. Not fear exactly, fear had worn itself thin over the years, but the old quiet ache of loving something that could be taken. She had learned it did not vanish, it simply became part of the breathing. Inside, she started the stove, measured coffee, cracked eggs into the skillet. The children drifted in one by one, rubbing eyes, asking quiet questions she answered with calm words. By noon, the house smelled of bread rising and wood smoke. By evening, the lamp was lit, supper laid, plates set for 5. When the door finally opened after dark, letting in a gust of cold air, and the scent of sage, Caleb stepped through dusty windburn, leading Nell by the bridle. He carried a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Eliza met him in the doorway. He handed her the bundle without a word. Inside lay a tiny pair of booties, knitted from soft wool, pale blue, impossibly small. "Found 'em at the trader's post," he said, voice rough. "Thought maybe one day." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "One day," she echoed. He stepped inside, then closed the door against the night. The children crowded around, clamoring to see what he had brought. Caleb knelt, let them climb onto his back and shoulders, laughing low in his throat. Eliza stood, watching, one hand resting on the gentle swell beneath her apron that no one had yet named aloud. The lamp flame danced across the walls, throwing warm shadows that reached every corner of the room. Outside, the wind moved through the grass with a sound like whispered promises. They were not finished. The land never let anyone be finished. But they were together, and that was enough to carry them forward into whatever came next, under the same wide, indifferent sky that had once turned its back on her, and now in its quiet way seemed to approve. More cowboy legends and outlaw tales are coming on Wild West Chronicles.